The Aglaya and Nick can mute and mute the microphone by themselves without my... Okay. So welcome everybody. I'm Patrizia Morgante, the USG Communication Officer. We know already. And I'm very happy. This is the second webinar of this series to celebrate the World Day of Social Communication. This year, the Pope has chosen a wonderful theme that is life becomes history. So it means that storytelling is the way we can make communication. But there is also another point in the message that I invite you to read that is wonderful. Pope Francis says that each life deserves a history, and each history is worth to tell. I think this is just wonderful for us as communicators and for us as religious sisters at the service of the gospel. 1 week ago, we met online, and the first webinar was about storytelling. So 2 experiences, one from the Secretary of the Dicastery for Communication, and the other one was from Aglaya Jimenez Turati. She's here also today to tell us more on how to use storytelling for reconciliation. This series of webinars are run by the USG, the Italian Conference of Religious, at the Dicastery of Communication of the Vatican. And we are very grateful for that. Today we are going to talk about non-violent communication. We belong a religion where words are very important, but now we are overwhelmed by words. So we have to find the right words to say in the right moment. We cannot just pollute the digital world with many rumors, words, voices. We have to be able to say the right word to touch the hearts of people. This is the challenge of communication today. This is why we have decided today to start with a contemplative space. I will guide you in a very short contemplation space with 2 goals. The first one is we are used to act, think, feel using the autopilot. We have to learn how to make a distance between our autopilot, our feelings, our words, our acts. The second goal is to make a healthy space within us, a silent space within us, in order the right words can come up. And I invite you to do that each time you have to do something for your congregation in terms of communication. Don't just act or react. Contemplation helps us to find the right center position to be proactive, to see the right word in the right moment. So I invite you to just take out your pen, your notes. If you like, you can close your eyes and just find a position that is comfortable for your body. Find a relaxing position for all your body. Leave your arms down. Leave the weight of the world out. Just let it go. Breathe naturally. Breathe in, breathe out. Do not control or change or modify your breath rhythm. Just be there. Breath in, breath out. Bring gently your attention to your body. No judge, just listening. No judge, just listening. If our mind goes away, bring it gently, your attention to your breath again. Gently, your attention to your breath again. In and out. Very, very slowly. You can start to move your fingers, your legs, your shoulders, and when you are ready, you can open your eyes. For the people who have just joined us, we have started with a contemplation space because we strongly believe that in a world that is full of words, to touch the hearts of people, we have to say the right word. And the right words come from our profound inner space. So now we move to the first speaker. Nick Schaffer is a layman. He's a friend of mine. So I want to say that as a first, because when we become friends, everything is easier in a way. That's in communication. We met some years ago within the organization CWR, Communicators for Women Religious, that is the unique organization for communicators for women religious in the world. So we met there. At that time, Nick was the executive director of that organization. But now he's director of the mission advancement of the Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation. Precious Blood fathers and brothers are religious people. And as you can imagine from his face, he has a family. So perhaps he's in the middle of his house with other people connecting, but we don't worry about that. So they are most welcome. I hope Mary will come up because she's the wonderful young daughter. And Nika will tell us about what are the criteria for the nonviolent communication. And he will tell us nonviolent communication in general, but then he will help us also to understand how we can improve nonviolent communication in a social media, where it's very difficult because of the hate speech, because of the lack of physical interactions that help to activate the side of the brain dedicated to empathy. So it's more difficult to be empathic in the digital world. Okay? So Nick, it's up to you. I think your microphone, you have to keep your microphone in your hands because it touches your skirt. So it's, if you can keep it like that, okay? You have the flow. You can unmute your microphone.
Okay. Can everyone hear me this morning?
Yes, perfectly.
Good, good. Well, thank you very much, Patrizia. And I do apologize. You're right. There is a lot of movement at my house. Mary came in just as you were saying that, but she's feeling camera shy this morning. But you'll get to meet her in a little while in the presentation. So I will go ahead and share my screen if I can.
Nick, could you please take your microphone? There is a noise under your voice that is very, or just keep it like that. Try. No, we can't hear you. No, put it again, the headset, but just take, don't leave it on your skirt like that. Just keep it in your hand because it's the movement. Sorry for that. No, we can't hear you.
All right.
Yes, yes.
Good?
Yes.
Can you hear
Okay,
me
thank
now?
you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, I love technology. When it works very well. When it does not work, it does not work very well. Good morning and or good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for inviting me to join. I'm so happy to be here with Patrizia and Florence and so many faces that I recognize. And so many friends. So as Patrizia mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about nonviolent communication today. And if you'll allow me, I will share my screen. And I will make these slides available to everyone afterwards, but I'll send them to Patrizia. And not only will you have the slides, but I'll also include my notes beneath the slides. So you will have these with you shortly. Okay. So weaving respectful words. I want to talk a little bit about, or at least before we go too much further, a little bit about how I come to this space. And Patrizia shared a little bit about my background and my meeting UISG and all of our friends there through Communicators for Women Religious. Because I come to you from the United States, I will share this disclaimer, which is kind of our standard here, that what I'm about to share with you is my own research, my own opinions, and so if there's any problems with that, blame me, not UISG or anyone else. Okay. I want to start off and ask everyone to think about some of the session goals. What are your expectations, questions, and concerns? What does this topic look like when we talk about it successfully? So if you would think about those as we go forward, and this might help us in our question and answer. Is it just enough to have an introduction to nonviolent communication? Do we want to know something more specific? So if we could start thinking about what those goals might be for you, and then when we have some more time at the end, we'll revisit this and see if we've met those goals. I want to spend a little time talking about the blessings, as I call it. I'm a believer in the power of stories. And for the past 20 years, as Patrizia has said, I've been collecting and sharing those stories specifically in service of causes and organizations and ministries that seek to change the world. This is nothing new for those of us in religious life. We are called to build up the kingdom and to spread the good news, and that's very much what I've tried to do. I've done that in Catholic schools, for public libraries, environmental organizations, and of course, religious institutes. I believe that through telling and sharing very compelling stories, the world can be matched up with the people and the resources necessary to correct all of life's ills. As Patrizia said, I started as a speechwriter and as a communicator, and over the years have developed into fundraising and really studying how we communicate in the digital space. But if you're asking me why I am interested in nonviolent communication, this is why. This is my family. You see here, my wife and my daughters. And on the left-hand side of the screen is a collage of Mary, my youngest daughter. She is quite a character. As Patrizia mentioned, it's through these relationships that we gain much of our inspiration, right? So yes, as a professional communicator, I understand and believe in the power of nonviolent communication. But my real inspiration is as a husband and as a father, and in those interpersonal relationships. And I think nonviolent communication can really become a way of life, or a way of how we operate, that can inform all of these spaces. I want to spend a little time talking about my current ministry, my full-time, my day job, if you will, the Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation, which is a restorative justice ministry located on the south side of Chicago here in the United States. It's in a neighborhood called the Back of the Yards. And we serve two neighborhoods, the Back of the Yards and Inglewood. And these are some of the most violent neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. with very high numbers of shootings, a lot of gang activity. And so that's where we've set up our Reconciliation Center. I came to the ministry through, like everyone's vocation story, a very winding path. We know that God writes straight and crooked lines, and this is definitely the case for us here at Precious Blood. I discerned with the missionaries of the Precious Blood during my university days, and have stayed connected with them as a companion, as an associate ever since. And this is a unique ministry because while I came to the ministry through the missionaries of the Precious Blood, the priests and the brothers, this is truly a joint endeavor with the priests and the brothers and the sisters. And so we also, our ministry is co-sponsored by two congregations of women religious, the Sisters of the Precious Blood from Dayton, Ohio, and the Adorers of the Blood of Christ. And so we have a real communal sense of our reconciliation space. We're a restorative justice hub, and our mission is to recognize human dignity through hospitality, hope, and healing. Now, a restorative justice hub is a new or an emerging concept, at least here in the States, and we are one of the 7 founding hubs here in Chicago. It means we're a community dedicated to restorative justice, holding people accountable, yes, but doing so in a way that helps them make amends and bring about reconciliation. And one of the environments, one of the pieces of our ministry where that comes out the most, and you see that here on the screen now, is in a process of circle keeping. We are engaged in peacemaking circles and healing circles as an active part of our ministry. In these circles, we see young people come together. We see gang members from opposing sides of a conflict come together in dialogue and to see each other. We see the mothers who have lost children to gun violence and incarceration come together to support one another. And so we've seen a lot of healing come from this. And the language that we use is rooted in nonviolent communication. I'll just share just one last piece. As an organization, we have our main community center. We do have the Mother Brunner Women's and Family Center. And we have programs for women, for young men, for the whole family, job training, development, but it's all rooted in this idea of trauma-informed care and nonviolent communication. So that's a little bit about my day job. That's the space that I come from and how I come to you this morning. And much of what we're going to talk about specific to nonviolent communication is based on the research of Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. Now, again, I will occasionally throughout these slides refer to Dr. Rosenberg and his works. And I have some links to these materials at the end, and so I'll share those with you. But I do want to give this disclaimer. I come from English-speaking background. As Patrizia can tell you, my attempts at Spanish are not great, and Italian is even worse. But that caveat is that gives me a uniquely North American and in English-speaking European perspective, meaning the resources that I've studied, the seminars that I've participated in, have been only in English and have largely focused on research that's coming from the United States and Canada and English-speaking parts of Europe. So I want to put that caveat out there because nonviolent communication is a much bigger topic. And there is great research and great practice that's being done all over the world and in many, many, many languages. And so I share that disclaimer now. This is where I come from, and this is where my experience is and what I share with you, but know that there is a greater library of nonviolent resources out there. Okay. Nonviolent communication resources out there. All right. I want to start with a simple conversation of why nonviolent communication. Dr. Rosenberg grew up in a time of great tension and anti-Semitism. He was born in 1934, and so grew up during World War II and in the post World War II era. And he was Jewish, and so experienced a great deal of anti-Semitism in his own family and a lot of persecution. This led him to start asking the questions, or why are people so cruel to each other? Why do they seek to harm one another? And he was a psychology student and later got his doctorate in psychology, but he had a fascination in particular with those who survived the Holocaust and came out of that very tragic experience with deep, deep compassion. And as a young man, he couldn't wrap his head around how anyone could go through that and not be angry and not be just frustrated and hurt. And what he realized is all those emotions were there, but there was a way to use all of that and bring out great compassion and empathy for other people. And so that really began a lot of his work. This resonates with my own work in Chicago and the work of our ministry at Precious Blood. As I mentioned, it's a restorative justice ministry. And as I've come to learn, this is not a tool in our toolbox. We often speak of new skills as a tool that we pull out and use as we need to. And nonviolent communication is something different. Much like restorative justice and reconciliation, these are things that become part of us. They become who we are and a way of how we see the world, part of our lens. And so nonviolent communication is just that. It's a lens. It's a way of being to act in a way to bring about change. So to answer the question, why nonviolent communication, I think there are some simple answers. Because there is violence in the world. Because we so often forget the humanity of other people, and in very extreme cases, we forget our own humanity. I don't think anyone on this call, unless I'm very mistaken, has recently probably engaged in physical violence towards another person. I think that's a very safe wager to make that none of us on this call have done that, at least not lately. But if we think about violence on a continuum, on a spectrum, and we think about the acts of criticism that pop into our heads, or that come out of our mouth, perhaps there are moments where it can be applicable into our life, and where we might need some study and some practice for nonviolent communication. Patrizia said in our introduction that it is very much about our connection, our cooperation between she and I is rooted very deeply in our friendship. And it's true that relationship is the centerpiece of a lot of successful work and collaboration. And that's true with nonviolent communication as well. At Precious Blood, our founder, Father Dave, likes to say, we're relationship first and program second. And while that is an interesting and unique phrasing, it's not unique to our ministry. There are many positive organizations out there working, and I think this group as well. We are about the relationship and about being together and accompanying one another. And because of that, our programs are successful. Our gatherings are places where the spirit can thrive. And so we move forward with that understanding about relationship. The objective of nonviolent communication, according to Dr. Rosenberg, is not to change people or their behaviors in order to get our way. It is to establish relationships based on honesty and empathy, which will eventually fulfill everyone's needs. So nonviolent communication is not about manipulation of another person in order to get them to act in a more peaceable way. It's a way to know ourselves, know what we need, what we want, and to communicate that honestly, and ask the other person, what do they need and what do they want? And ask them to communicate that honestly to us. And through that process, it's very hard to be hostile or angry with one another when you truly see them and when they see you. Because then it's our connection, it's our mutuality that we see and that we experience. I'll share with you a little later about a resource I found called the Nonviolent Communication Academy. It's an online training module with some very wonderful resources. But in all of my reading and all of my study, they have one of the more succinct and clear goals or outcomes of learning, of why it's important to learn and practice nonviolent communication. One, it's to enhance your skills for listening to what other people mean behind their words. And I want to spend a few moments on that and just think about that, because very often in the communication process, when we are a sender and receiver of signals, both auditory and the nonverbals, I wonder how often we're actually listening, and how often we're waiting for a pause so we can say our next piece. And so the first outcome of nonviolent communication is that deep, active listening to what others mean and what they're saying behind their words. Not that their actual words aren't honest, but we all know that sometimes there's more meaning behind those words. The second outcome is to enhance your ability to express your desires. One of the key tenets of nonviolent communication, and it comes across both in Dr. Rosenberg's book and in the online training that I'll be recommending later, and in many of the other seminars and courses, is to spend time, much like Patrizia led us this morning, centering and being aware of yourself and what your needs and desires are in a communication, in a dialogue, in any sort of interaction. Okay, so that's that self-awareness piece. And then the third is learning and practicing the ability to stay emotionally present to yourself so that you're better equipped to make sound decisions, not just for your life and your relationships, but also for the communication that you're engaged in. And these are very general, right? The Nonviolence Communication Academy is open, and as a secular organization, they work with anyone who comes to them that wants to learn. What is interesting to me is how this is important for religious life. What makes nonviolent communication that much more beneficial to those of us who are actively engaged in religious life, in living out a unique charism as part of our everyday life and our everyday ministry? Nonviolent communication is wonderful in your interpersonal relationships, whether you're a lay person and living with other people, whether you're a sister, a brother, a priest living in community. Nonviolent communication can be very helpful. It's great in our professional life because at work, in our day jobs, we need to have that ability to communicate with one another and to preserve those relationships. It becomes, I think, almost critical in religious life because those two parts of everyone's life are so blended, right? We know that in your full-time ministry, your work, there can be disagreements, there can be conflicts that you have to work through. But we know also in religious life, at the end of the day, whether you're living in a small community or in a larger community setting, a mother house, you go back at the end of the day and you're with the same people. And so the opportunity for those tensions or disagreements or differing of opinions to spill over is higher, is significantly higher. And so while we try to have healthy boundaries in religious life, we know that there are some unique challenges. I worked with a group a couple years ago, and they had a very interesting scenario where they were shutting down a sponsored ministry. I believe it was a school in this particular case. And the leadership team did not inform the communicator that they were going to shut down the school. So the communicator found out when a member of the press called them and said, "Hey, what's going on? Tell me about this school that's closing." The communicator said, "I'll have to get back to you on that." And found out that the leadership team had released this without their knowledge. And from a communicator standpoint, that's very, very hard, right? Because we have a lot of work to do to prepare for big announcements. And as I was discussing this with one of the leadership teams, they said, "Well, we've learned that, or we were concerned that the communicator couldn't keep it under wraps until we were ready to announce it. So we just announced it ourselves." And for the professional communicators in the room, that's just a stab to the heart. That's very hard to hear, because it's part of our profession to hold things in confidence and release them at the appropriate time. And so the communicator was frustrated. I was frustrated. And we were talking with this leadership team, and it finally came out that previously that role had been filled by a sister. And if she heard something that she thought that everyone else should know and disagreed with the leadership's time, she just told them. So it perpetuated that problem. And what we were able to learn through this process of dialogue through and understanding some nonviolent communication is both sides were hurt and upset in this operation. And so it really led to some good healing and a good relationship, a better relationship between the communicator and the leadership team, because they understood they could trust the new communicator, and that those dynamics and those tensions did not have to be there. Okay. So very, very important and very useful there, I think, in religious life. But that's enough about why it's important. Let's talk a little bit about some of the actual principles of nonviolent communication. There are 4 core principles that are a part of the nonviolent communication process. And I will pause and apologize. And before I send these slides to Patrizia, I will fix all my numbers, because now all my lists are numbering 1. Um, but the four key principles are observations, feelings, needs, and requests. And the way that this works is that for each of the four principles, we think about and we practice two sides. So if you look at observations, feelings, needs, and requests, we're going to look at both sides of the communication spectrum, right? So mine and yours, the I and the you, the self and the other, right? So when we're thinking about the nonviolent communication process, we're sending and receiving messages. So we're asking, how clearly am I expressing how I am without blaming or criticizing you? And then empathetically receiving how you are without hearing blame or criticism. And so we go through this, each of these, and we look at both sides of the equation. I will illustrate. When we enter into this dialogue, we start off with our observations. In any given conflict, I need to think about what I observe that does or doesn't contribute to my well-being, right? So remember, nonviolent communication, it's not always about conflict. Sometimes you're sharing not what's lacking, but what you are needing. So your observation could be what you're seeing, hearing, remembering, imagining, and what you're experiencing about the situation and the world. So we might in a conversation say, when I see this behavior, when I see you yell at our other sister, you identify that observation then. And then on the other side, I need to be open to what it is that you observe that does or does not contribute to your well-being, right? So it's that dialogue, both of us. So if Patrizia and I were having a conversation, I need to be mindful of my observations and of Patrizia's, okay? Similarly, how I feel in relation to what I observe. So, pardon me, emotion or sensation rather than a thought. I feel hurt. I feel concern. And then on the contrary, being aware of how you feel in relation to what you observe. So it's valuing both sides of that equation in the process. Similarly, it's what I need or value that causes my feelings. So when I see, whatever the instance would be, I feel whatever that feeling arises. The needs would be because I need to be valued. And then it goes again to the other side of the equation. What do you need? And then clearly stating what those requests would be. What would you be willing to do? And what would you like me to do? So this can be very up in the head. I will share a simple example from my house. My oldest daughter, Teresa, is 15. And a few weeks ago, she was rather quiet and up in her room and reading and I don't know what else. And I called her for dinner And no answer. So I went up and I said, "Hey, it's time to eat. Let's go." And she snapped. And I heard you. I already answered. Now, I had a couple of options for how to respond to that. I was right. I called her for dinner. No one downstairs heard her. And I could have really dug in my heels with that. But I could tell that something was not right. So I said, I see that you're pretty upset. And I just called you for dinner. So I feel a little frustrated because this was a fairly simple request. And I need you to respond when an adult calls you. But tell me what's going on. And it opened up this dialogue, right? She was able to share that, was she upset about being called to dinner? Absolutely not. But what was able to come out of that is she was feeling tension. They're finishing school this year because of the COVID-19 remotely. And she was studying and she was trying to get projects submitted, and the internet was acting up, and her sisters were annoying her, and her project group mates weren't doing their parts, and all of this came out. And I was able to learn that she was feeling great tension and great pressure, and calling her to dinner when she wasn't ready to go was one too many things for her to handle in that moment. And so what she needed was to have some peace and quiet, right? But she wasn't able to communicate that. And so through this process of nonviolent communication and through this dialogue, I was able to get to a spot where, she and I were on the same page, and we were able to get her some space, and she was able to calm down. But, had I not been in this mindset and working on this presentation, which is probably what kept it so fresh. So Teresa owes you, Patrizia, a debt of thanks. My reaction might have been, "Why are you yelling at me? I'm your father. Come on." And so it took what could have been a very tense situation and made it a much more pleasant and healing situation, because I was able to figure out that my daughter was stressed and what she was going through. Okay. So let's spend a little time talking about nonviolent communication in the digital world. I have this idea that if I ever publish a paper on nonviolent communication, it's going to be nonviolent communication and emails. Because I don't know how many of you have experienced this, but there is a lot of problems with email and with social media, because we write these messages out and they're taken totally out of context. There's no voice, there's no tone. We don't have the nonverbal communication that goes with them. So it's just what's printed on the page. And many of us don't write emails like someone who's writing a novel or something that's going to be published, where you're poring over and over the word choice and how it's crafted, and you're thinking about how people will read it. We use email and social media differently. And I think that's where some tensions happen. So I want you to think a minute, if you've ever experienced an email that has made you angry, or hurt your feelings, or frustrated you, or set you down a path that you later learned really was not the intention of the sender. I know I have. And I think email, and to a different degree social media, because that's a different animal a little bit too, they're fertile grounds where I think nonviolent communication can and should be practiced. If you've participated in these webinars before, if you've gone to any of the workshops that Patrizia and UISG have done on the importance of communication for religious life, this is a natural extension of that, because as those of us in religious life and our ministries move deeper and deeper into the digital world, we must pay attention to these things, because that digital space is a space where communication is happening, but it's happening so fast and so much of it that it's hard to keep up. It's hard to catch our breath. And so that can be scary, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be there. It just means we need to be more intentional and invite the Holy Spirit to come with us when we venture out into the digital world, because we need the Holy Spirit in the digital world. So let's talk a little bit about some of those challenges.
Nick, you still have 3-4 minutes.
Okay. 3 or 4? Okay. Nonviolent communication in the digital world, there are some challenges, right? Nonviolent communication calls us to suspend our assumptions. This is not a common practice on social media. It asks us to reduce or eliminate our judgment. Also not common on social media. And it calls us to be present to one another. The hard part is, on social media, people hide behind an avatar or operate in a very controlled or one-sided environment. It prevents real connections in a lot of cases, but not all cases, right? So when we're in the digital space, when we're thinking about nonviolent communication, we have to go back over those steps of observing our, observations, feelings, needs, and then those requests. So if you think back to those emails that we've read that hurt us, I sometimes feel very foolish when I get very upset or frustrated about an email and then find out that what I was upset about was not the intention of the sender. The problem is, sometimes it takes a long time to ever realize that individual meant no insult, meant no harm by what they said. And so we need to bring that moment of pause, just like when we started this webinar, the moment of pause, into our digital interactions, whether that's reading an email, whether that's on social media. Okay. I draw on this slide, and remember, you'll get copies of this and my notes. Some tips for practicing nonviolent communication in digital spaces. Dr. Rosenberg identifies and reminds us to be mindful of communication that blocks compassion, moralistic judgments, comparisons, and denial of responsibility. Now, these come from Dr. Rosenberg in the interpersonal space, but I think they have real application when we're existing in the digital space. We need to remember the power of empathy. And that can be as simple as pausing before we respond and trying to see how someone who may have posted something that's offensive maybe be posting that or holding that opinion out of a place of deep hurt and pain. We need to take responsibility of our own feelings, and we need to practice the protective use of force. Now, this is a hard one, and I almost left it off of this presentation. Dr. Rosenberg and many others who practice and teach about nonviolent communication are very clear that nonviolent communication doesn't mean that we give everyone a free pass to do and say whatever they want without accountability. And so Dr. Rosenberg draws a distinction between the protective use of force and the punitive use of force. And I'll explain a little bit about that. The intention behind protective use of force is to prevent injury or injustice, while punitive force, which is what most people use, is force that's used to cause people to suffer for their misdeeds. It's the punishment. And that's what we want to get rid of. But the punitive use or the protective use of force, at least in social media, that's where those who are, whether it's your personal feed or if you're managing a feed for your congregation or your ministry, that's where you take down those hate speech posts. You take down or you may block a participant who's just there to cause trouble. In digital world, we call them the trolls, right? And that doesn't mean you just turn them off. Maybe it means you recognize that they're hurting. And so you invite them into like an offline chat or a private message. Sometimes it does just mean you block them, right? Because there are people, and I believe in the last session, there was some experience of people on the digital space that just want to go and cause trouble. And so sometimes it is our responsibility and use of that protective force to block those people who want to cause trouble. We want to also be careful when we're talking about nonviolent communication, especially for our ministries. So many of us work with vulnerable populations, including, in fact, some of our own sisters that we need to protect. And so we have to find that balance between, yes, being empathetic and understanding, but also exercising this protective use of force that we have. Okay. I know my time is coming very quickly to an end. I want to share with you, as I mentioned before, the Nonviolent Communication Academy. I found this resource while preparing specifically for this talk. Where I live in the United States is not easy to find in-person nonviolent communication trainings. And that's true in many places. It's just hard to connect with big groups. And so this group, in responding to that need, created an all virtual academy to learn about nonviolent communication, to go through an orientation course, and then to create these virtual communities of nonviolent communication practice. And so in preparation for this, I did the 30-day free course just to see what kind of resources they provide. And I would recommend it to anyone, especially, again, their limit is all their content is in English. All their videos, all their documents are in English. So that is a limit. But if you can be comfortable in that language environment, this is a great resource. If you want to learn a little bit more about nonviolent communication and learn how they have wonderful practice modules. And I wanted to do some more practice here, but it's very hard with, I don't know how many people are on this call, 30 or 40 or more people on a Zoom call. More. Patricia's eyes got big. And so that would be hard to do those exercises here, but I really encourage you to look at this resource, and there are others out there, but this was one I found was very good. And I think I'm ready for questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nick. I already have a question in the chat, but I want to highlight some elements that you share with us during your reflection. I like the idea that nonviolent communication is a style of life, because it's not just the way I speak, it's also the way I use my body to communicate. Sometimes I realize that because I'm Italian, and I know that for some culture I'm too aggressive, with my body. And this is also a question of culture. The way we approach each other, the way we communicate, it depends a lot on the culture we belong. And the other thing I want to highlight is the key role that needs and values of the persons play in the communication relationship. Because sometimes you are not able to say what you really need, but it's part of the conflict. It's part of perhaps of the, of the answer, of the way. And in Italian, there is a group of communicators and linguistics who are studying how to, in Italian we say disputa felice. In English, I think it's like happy debate or healthy debate, happy argue. That means that we can argue, but in a way that I'm not over you, I'm not take over you. And for physical relationships, or let's say face-to-face relationships, are easier. But when we are in the digital world, it's much more difficult. So I think, Nick, I don't know what you think, but perhaps we need to have a very specific webinar on how to be non-violent in our digital communication.
I think that we could definitely fill an hour talking about that, and I think we would just be beginning to talk.
That's right, because we should learn first how the digital communication really works. What are the dynamics? How the digital surrounding affects the way we relate to each other. So I think this is a very big point, and perhaps we will go more in depth on that. So thank you very much, Nick. I don't know if you agree, but I would like now to give the floor to Aglaya to listen to all their reflection, and then we can take a time for question and answer or just comments. I just want to read the question in the chat while Aglaya gets ready so she can prepare herself. She's worried to speak English, Nick, so I understand her. The question from Odira, if I receive a knowing message from email, when I know that the sender is angry, do I need to reply immediately? What do you think?
Me?
Yes.
No, in fact, my experience, well, it depends, right? I'm going to borrow from our Buddhist cousins and say it depends. Sometimes, depending on the nature of the communication, urgent reply is necessary if there's a deadline or something like that. But I have also found that giving a little bit of pause, taking time to breathe, think, and go through some of these nonviolent techniques that we talked about, learning why are you getting frustrated, why are you angry before you respond can be very helpful. I also am one, if you're able, if I get a very upsetting email, I won't respond by email. I pick up the phone and I call. It changes a little bit of the rules of the game. And I've found sometimes people, they feel like they can be very angry in email and it can be very official. And then you get them on the phone, maybe the anger comes down a notch because it's a little harder to yell at someone over the phone. And so I've found that can be another way to kind of diffuse.
Thank you, Nick. And Nick, I also think that perhaps if a person or myself is angry, there is always a reason. So we never know. I see that there are other questions, and to be diplomatic, I want to ask you also an Italian question. So I will move in the Italian room and you can listen to the translation. And then we go to listen to Aglaya and we will take a time for question and answer afterwards. Vittoria ti chiede.
Vittoria is asking, I've always heard that in front of a verbal aggression, even coming from another sister, the best answer is silence. What do you think about it?
Nika, you have to unmute your microphone. Okay?
I didn't get the translation. Sorry.
I will translate it for you. She's a sister and said, I always heard saying that when I receive an aggression from a sister, for instance, in my community, the best way to answer is the silence. What do you think?
From my perspective, from the culture that I have grown up in, and from the training that I have received, silence sometimes, especially in the digital space, leaves us with a chance to go down unhealthy paths in our head, and lets other people do that too. I will own my bias. I am a communicator. I default to, when in doubt, talk. So I am learning to find that balance, because my default is always to talk it out. And I think that there's some wisdom in finding middle ground with that, right? Like, you may want to, sometimes you don't dignify things if they're just petty, and you kind of ignore it and let it pass. But that just ignores the problem. I think the goal of nonviolent communication is to address an issue. And so if you have someone who is saying things that are hurtful or annoying or frustrating, you know, if it's one time and they're having a bad day, and you say, well, I'm going to ignore that for now and see what happens. Okay, fine. But if it happens more than once, now you have a problem. And that's where nonviolent communication can come in to help you really seek resolution, right? So it's the decision, do you want to just get through it and make the tension go away, or do you want to really seek reconciliation and healing? And I think that's the difference that you have, from my perspective.
Thank you very much, Nick. And it's interesting that also sisters and participants are answering in the chat. And I want to highlight one of the comments that is perhaps, or a suggestion for Victoria, perhaps using the question as a reply is a good format when receiving an angry email or social media. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I don't want to stop questions and comments, but just to move on later, because I would like now to give the floor to Aglaya Jimenez Turati. She will tell us her biography, but what I want to highlight is her study path, because at the moment she's a president of Peace Words Association. But her doctorate in communication was about storytelling. And now she's preparing the second book talking about therapeutic storytelling. And she will share with us today 2 experiences, 2 case studies, one in South Africa and one in Colombia. So welcome, Aglaya, and don't get worried.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon to you all. I want to apologize for my English, because probably, I don't know if you will understand me perfectly as I would like, but I will try to do my best. I'm going to present myself. My name is Aglaya Jimenez Turati. I'm Italo-Colombian. I was born in Italy. And I'm, as Patrizia said, the president of an association I founded in 2015, Peace Words, which means, no, in English, no, it's Peace Words. I've been working with projects connected to contrast violence, contrast discrimination, such as gender violence, racism, through the storytelling. And thanks to this, I published my first book in 2018, connected to the stories of the people that share their experience in this field. I am now actually finishing my second book on therapeutic storytelling. And what I'm going to tell you today is some two particular experiences I've lived during my whole life that led me to understand some key points that are helping me in what I'm doing now. I would like to ask you first to focus on the key concept of my speech of today, the idea of space. Patrizia before said that it is important, the inner space, that we focus on our inner space in order to then communicate. But actually, what I think is also important and is the idea that also to express ourselves and what we have inside, there must be a space. So this is a key concept I would like to focus when I'm telling what I've lived. And then I will share with you some punctual consideration on what I told you. So my first experience took me back to South Africa. Most of you know, I think you all know what happened in South Africa. The apartheid regime ended in 1994, and then there were the reconciliation process that ended in the parliament in 2001. And since the moment, the institution of justice and reconciliation have been founded, and they are working to take on the process of reconciliation in South Africa, and they are actually working on other countries also in Africa with these with their projects. And but as you know, a process where you transform a society never take 1 or 2 years or 10 years. It can take 50 years or even more. And well, I went in South Africa in 2012. So the process was over, and my filed research for my PhD thesis, which was on apartheid and reconciliation, focusing on the idea of integration, of inclusion, and connection of the different communities in South Africa that were actually they were very divided, no?
Agalia, please, because you.
I can't hear. There was someone who was asking something, but no.
Yes. Can you speak on the English channel, not on the original? Did you choose a language?
I think yes. Let me check. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is it okay now? Sorry.
Okay.
I realized I was on the. Okay.
Aglaya, sorry. I take the advantage also to tell you if you can go a little bit slowly because
sorry,
you are running. You have a translator.
This is the motion of speaking in English.
I know. Sorry, but we understand very well.
Okay, so well, I did a lot of interviews, qualitative interviews to different people that have been working in the process of reconciliation, even after the TRC work, and also with victims of apartheid regime. As you know, the idea of the main idea that led the reconciliation process in South Africa was the idea of storytelling. Exactly. Both victims and perpetrators told their stories in order to trying to rebuild the fabric, the social fabric. And one of the experiences I had that impressed me the most was in Sebokeng, which is in Zone 7 of Sebokeng, which is a small place that was a former township in the South Gauteng, which is close to Johannesburg. So it takes like 40 minutes to get there in this small bus. I still remember that journey. And Zone 7 is also today one of the most dangerous places in this side of in Sebokeng, which is divided in different zones. Actually, it was the first time that I felt like in danger in my whole time in South Africa. And I took with me an interpreter because I used to think, and I also think now, that when I interview someone, it's always good to make the people feel comfortable in speaking his or her own language, because in this way you can express better yourself and concept that maybe in another language it's harder to show. So I was with this interpreter, and we went in this house where I met two women. And they were so closed, because at the beginning I was actually asking and they were like answer yes, no. And I felt I'm losing time because I didn't find a way to break this wall they had. And they interviewed because I was keeping asking, like to feel them more comfortable and not and taking little breaks. But the interview were terrible because actually they did not answer very well. They felt very closed and very did not trust me, no. But at the end we stayed there, and after the interview we started talking, and all of a sudden they started, I mean, when I got there they didn't speak in English, like they didn't want me to think they could understand me. But then after the interview they started speaking English with me, and they say and they told me thank you, because you came here and you heard our story. And until now we were waiting for someone to listen to our story. Actually, I realized that this woman, like many other people in South Africa, did not have the space to tell their story and to heal the ones the apartheid regime left in them. In many communities, not just this one where I went. So what I realized for the first time is that sometimes in order to change and to transform a society, you need to create more spaces and really include everyone in this process. Because what I felt is that a lot of people have been let, how can I say, was forgot in this process. And these words, thank you for listening us, because no one did, really moved me inside, because I realized that, yeah, when you try to rebuild a social fabric made of a lot of stories, made of a lot of words, you must create the spaces for this. And the second experience I would like to tell you is about what I am doing now, because I'm gathering a lot of stories from teachers in a special region of Colombia, which is close to Venezuela, where that is hit by not just the conflict that in Colombia there has been the most long conflict in the world. And after 2016, there have been they signed the agreement for peace, but actually, what can I say? It did not went as most of the people wanted. So, for example, in this area, before there were just two guerrillas, and now there are 8. So, and they fight each other. Can you imagine the peasant, the people that live there, the children in a context like that? And to make the situation worse, now there are a lot of immigrants from Venezuela, so xenophobia is increasing a lot. So it's a region in Colombia which is hit by a lot of problems and complications. And in this case, I'm trying to gather stories, constructive and positive stories of people that is actually transforming the society, starting from education, which is a way of storytelling, and it is very therapeutic, because the way you enable someone especially a child, to understand the environment in which he or her is, can create a man with a conscience that maybe will change the society in the future. So it's very therapeutic, actually, the education. And so I'm working with this with a guy who is helping me in gathering these experiences, and he is through a national project trying to give in spaces to teachers to express themselves. So one of these teacher, Rosa Leal, witnessed also the importance in the role of peace building of a lot of dioceses, because the church is doing also a lot in this process and helping many teachers to participate to formation and educational project to peace building. I really call these teachers heroes because what they do is incredible. Because imagine they are trying to teach to children that in most cases are children of opposite sides, like paramilitaries or guerrilleros. And can you imagine in a class gather a lot of teachers and children with different backgrounds in context? So the teacher is not process and practice could create a space where, can you hear me? Yes, where that without storytelling, this space could be full of hate and so on. So with through the education, her role as a mediator could plant some seeds of empathy and understanding toward a different concept of social cohesion. And this is important, very important, especially because among children, using her words, therapeutic storytelling opened a way through the creation of images and stories of experiences in the challenge to dignify and recognize childhood in a context of armed conflict, like it is the Catatumbo region in Colombia. So telling these stories, I mean, what Rosa Leal and other teachers did was create a space where they was not just teaching, they were put in practice therapeutic storytelling to start healing, because imagine living a childhood in a context like this one. So in both cases, the idea it is space, because I learned that we really have a need, even in situations like here, like in Italy, we need spaces to express our words in order to share the pain and re-elaborate the past and the present. As such as in my experience here in Italy, I am doing this through this project of therapeutic storytelling with violence and discrimination. Most of people is like not able to express their stories and is like frustrated by this inner pain they have, and they have no spaces to tell what they are feeling. So the way weight is the way. Wait, il peso. Aspetta, come si dice?
Yes, it's the burden, I think, more.
Burden
Mm-hmm.
is much bigger, but when you find a space, safe space, where you can share what you have, this burden, all of a sudden is shared. So it's less heavy on inside, no? So telling this, I would like to share some punctual consideration based on what I had told you now. And it is that our social fabric is made by our interaction, and our interaction are possible thanks to the communication. And so the dialogue made by words that express ourselves. Second, that the nonviolent communication is made by positive and deep relationship that take into account the impact on ourselves and on the others, the weight of the words. We all have the same emotion, and I think emotion are the keys through which put each other in contact, because we cannot hide happiness, sadness, pain, all these things are things that we have in common, and the need to define it, and in order to re-elaborate it, it is very important. So I mean, one of the keys in therapeutic storytelling are precisely the emotion. So we are all connected, and this is a powerful connection, because it is far better to connect each other and let the energy we have, positive or negative, flow, than to separate each other, and all the energy can come from this connection fly. It means that we need to start practice, not just ourselves, but even in the medias and etc. Positive, inclusive words and speeches that can let us see each other authentically without roles that society impose to us. I was focusing on the need of surviving and feeling safe, which is important, because we need to consider that sometimes we have a lot of things in common, but I mean, no, wait. Because this is important, because this can change the picture we have, our imaginary, collective imaginary, because this can change the picture we have from war to peace. And here, in this case, education is very important, because can let understand us that we are unique. So we should not fight or be in competition, but cooperate. I think that nonviolent communication should enlighten our uniqueness, using words that can change the collective imaginary we have. Because we should stop thinking that someone is better than other, but everyone is part of this social fabric and can be very important. And without this, his abilities, who he is and what he feels, wouldn't be the same. So everyone is very unique, and this, in this sense, it is very important to make it emerge through positive words. Another thing it is very important, in my opinion, is the emotional intelligence, like empathy, can be stimulated by positive speeches, and this can help us react different to the situation we face. It is very important because can be stimulated by putting ourselves, open ourselves to the others, like open them and let them understand what we feel and our emotions. And something very important is that there is never one version of the truth, and everyone has his own picture. Like we can fight as a nation, or I can fight with my neighbor, but this is the same idea I said before, which is competition, which is trying to not see each other as part of a same fabric, but the need of feel superior. And again, in this case, words can help our collective imaginary to switch positively. And
Glaya, we should close, yeah.
So, well, the thing is, after what I said, is yeah, we must focus on the spaces. We must focus on the way we react in each situation we live, and each of us can create in his own life and his own daily life the space to connect with the others. Sorry for my English.
Thank you. It was very clear. I don't know for the other. I understand. I'm Italian. I can understand perfectly. So thank you very much, Aglaya. I'm aware that perhaps we would need more time. And I'm also aware that we are supposed to close now the webinar. So I want to invite the people, if you have to go, please feel free to go. But I don't feel I can close like that. I think we need just at least 15 minutes to, for some feedback, and to give the flow to our speakers for 2 minutes at the very end. So feel free to leave if you have other commitments, but I will take other 15 minutes. I'm sorry for my colleagues that are Florence and Claudia, but just 15 minutes. And while you think to your questions that you can write in the chat, or you can take the flow and say something, consider that we do not have a lot of time. I want to highlight the fact that stories, Aglaya, as you said, they unveils the needs, the desires, the symbols, everything that belong a person, a human person. So, and stories are effective because it's not just from the cognitive side of our body, but it touches our emotions, our profoundness, our body. So it's a more complete tool to communicate. And I love the idea I heard yesterday in your online Facebook, in your live Facebook, the experience of the Colombian teacher was very interesting. How we can use the storytelling to transform, not only to communicate, to transform personal and social life. Okay. Many, many words. So, okay, I will try to, at the moment, I will allow you to unmute your microphone. So be responsible. If you want to say something, you are most welcome. In the meantime, I will check the chat. I invite also our speakers to read the chat because there are a lot of messages for them, actually, not for me. So feel free to take the word if you like.
I would like to offer a reflection on something I read recently. I think it links with particularly what we've just heard. It said between every stimulus, whatever that might be, and response, there is a space. And it's our choice what we put in that space. I read it over and over, and the call I heard in that was to real presence, to be sufficiently present in the moment that I recognized there was a space for choice. And I think it linked back with what the first speaker was saying about autopilot. But it's that mindfulness and living in the present moment, the gift of real presence of myself to myself and to the world. And I just thought it was a wonderful concept for me to reflect on in my daily interaction with other human persons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. Please open your mic, unmute your microphone just when you have to talk, please. If you want to share something, you're welcome. Also in Spanish, I can translate, I can help.
I'd like to share something if possible.
Sure.
I also do a lot of work with nonviolent communication. And I've learned in working with some persons who have lived under autocratic regimes that they literally do not have the words for feelings in their vocabulary. I belong to a nonviolent communication practice group. One of the women in the group was born in East Germany. And she shared that when we talk about feelings, she cannot bring up the words. She never learned those words as a child in Germany. So she she's learning these words now for the first time. So if you don't have the words for a feeling, you can't name it. And this brought back a memory when I was working with a group of sisters in Namibia, which also had been under German occupation. And the superior drove me to the airport. And on the way to the airport, she said, "I'm so glad that you invited us to share our feelings during this meeting. You're the first person that ever asked." You know, and she was saying something the same. You know, she had never been asked what she felt. So it's so important for people to be given the words.
Thank you very much, Sister Barbara. Nick, I will leave you the floor to both of you at the end, if you don't mind.
Oh, sì.
Sorry, so we can leave the space to some other comments. I invite you, Aglaya and Nick, please to check the chat and select a couple of questions you want to comment or answer. But I want to invite the sisters, or if you want to say something.
I would like to say something.
Please.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to thank our presenter. Thank you very much. I could understand you, and it was very, very helpful and insightful. You spoke of images, and one of the things that I found helpful when people cannot share or don't have the words is ask them to color or draw what that experience was like for them. And then sometimes in doing so, you get a sense of what they're feeling, and then it opens the conversation at times. So for people who are highly introvert, who are very, or who don't have the words, or even children who can't even understand their experiences, I find that coloring or asking them to draw it, or, you know, like, what was your experience like? Can you name it? Was it like a boat on the ocean and you were overwhelmed, or those kind of things? And I know you know this, our presenter knows that, but there's just so much time to include all these things. So I just find that very helpful when I myself am blocked in trying to facilitate that sharing for healing. Thank you.
I would like to say something.
Hola, yo puedo hablar, yo voy a hablar en español. Lo siento.
Sí, un momentito.
Para que se pueda comprender.
Sí, María, espera un momentito.
Bueno, yo soy responsable general
María,
de
¿me escuchas?
Y...
María,
¿Sí?
¿me escuchas? Perdóname.
Sí.
Solamente un momentito porque estaba escuchando otra persona que estaba hablando, pero en todo caso, tú estás en la sala español, ¿no? Entonces, sí. Claudia va a traducir al inglés. Muy bien, perfecto, perdona. Sigue.
Sigue. Y hace tiempo que me estoy estudiando todo esto de la
I've been studying on nonviolent communication since this method became known to me. I read this book that was mentioned by Nick, and I've been working in this field, and it seems to me as a new language, and it is a very sincere process, but at the same time it is also difficult to assimilate this process, since it is a new structure of thinking in a coordination with also feelings, and therefore it is not easy, and sometimes it seems to me very important also within our communities and also in our accompaniment within the communities. We have conflicts, and I think it is very interesting and very important, and I believe that as I said, this could be a fundamental element for our communities. And also I would like to thank you for choosing this topic so that we can also transmit and also this is a formation and should be in our ongoing formation within our communities as an important tool that is going to enrich also our communities in order to build this kingdom, which is the church, and how we can build together. So thank you very much. And especially I encourage everyone in nonviolent communication to go ahead.
Muchas gracias, Maria. We have time for just one comment live, and then we leave the floor to our speakers to give like a last word, I would say. So, an Italian-speaking person. Oh, who wants? Okay. I think we can give the floor first to Nick. Just to...
Okay. I'll just say a few words. First of all, Sister Barbara, I can't thank you enough for your contribution about the words and so many people not having the feeling words and the need words to engage in the process of nonviolent communication. As I'm sure you've seen and as I've seen in my own study, many of the trainings and the study groups provide a handout of those words to start to introduce that language. And when I send Patrizia my slides, I will send some samples of that I found in my own study, that some simple ones, but I think they are very hopeful. And again, the limitation would be they are all in English. There was a question also in the chat about the use of protective force. And by that, I mean, one of the criticisms of nonviolent communication is that we just lay down anytime there's a conflict, and that is not the case. Nonviolent communication in its truest form takes courage, and it takes strength, and it takes a certain kind of force to be protective and to stand up to harm and conflict and say, no, we don't do that here. We're not going to engage in that. And so that's that protective force. The example Dr. Rosenberg used, and I'll end on this, is he once was walking down the street and saw a young man come by and steal a woman's purse on the street. And Dr. Rosenberg wrapped his arms around him and held him there and was able to retrieve her purse. And then the police came and they did that piece. And his point was he did use some force in a nonviolent way to prevent further harm. He didn't punch the assailant. He didn't physically attack him, but he did use some force to protect not only the woman who was being mugged, but himself and the offender. So it's that idea of we're going to be resolute in our actions, but not punitive. And we can talk more about that offline, and I'll send my contact information. But just to thank you all for the conversations in the chat, and this was just a wonderful session. So thank you very much.
Aglaya?
I would like to answer. I read some questions, but the last one I think is, I saw this one. When someone don't want to answer with words and close herself or himself, how do you do? And actually want to share my experience also in this, because when I do my laboratories or when I do digital storytelling too, a way to let the people open is start by myself. I always start sharing first what I feel, what my experience, to let them see that they have the same kind of emotion on the topic we face. No, so the idea is if you want someone to open, start yourself, because this way you will feel him or herself feeling better and trust you, because this is a way of connection that create a trust. So I think it is very important to start a communication with someone who is closed. And another question, there are a lot of, but what I am doing is using the therapeutic storytelling, but not in a psychologist way or others way, because there are a lot of way of see the storytelling, but this is therapeutic in the sense that put ourselves in an authentic connection. We can start, we can put each other in connection, not just physically, but mentally. We need to be open to receive the stories we are going to hear, but also when we communicate the stories, doing not just telling some words, but take out our feelings. So this is why I call it therapeutic, and this put each other in a connection that I think is very important, because when you really understand that emotions are the same for everybody, even if I'm Italian, even if I am Colombian, even if I am American, even if I am South African, the emotions are the same. So this put each other in a connection that break the walls that the society constructed to divide each other. And in this way, we enter in a connection that is human before being a therapeutic psychologist approach or whatever. No, when we start this and we see that these have effects, we can really understand. And this is why I told before, each one have the possibility to practice daily, because each other can in practice do this. I mean, put in connection, in an authentic connection. I think I hope to explain it well.
Thank you very much, Aglaya. Thank you very much, Nick. There are a lot of comments I was reading in the chat, and you know, it's actually there for you. So enjoy the comments, and thank you very much for the participants. I really think that this is a very important issue for us as Catholics who want to be in the digital area in a different way. I'm not saying that we are the best. I'm just saying that we have to witness the gospel through our nonviolent communication. Thank you very much to Sister Florence, to Claudia for the translation. I want to remind you that the third and the last webinar on this for communication will be May 28, 2 p.m. Rome time. And the theme will be again storytelling in the social media. We will talk specifically on the storytelling right now, and specifically storytelling in Facebook. So don't forget, we will wait for you. But before closing this meeting, I would like to invite you. We start with a contemplation time. So I think we can listen to the words of the other, but then we have to find and be in contact with our word, with the word that just Patrizia, in this moment of my life, I can say to others. So I would like you to write your word in the chat. The word that you feel that is yours after listening Nick and Aglaya's word. Just one word. You can also tell it. Huh? I open your microphone.
Trust.
Compassion.
Empathy.
Empathy.
Hope and possibilities.
Connection.
Interconnectedness.
Fraternity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think these words are a gift for you, Nick and Aglaya, for sharing your profound experience in this field. So thank you very much. Thank you to all. Take care and see you online next Thursday. Okay, have a nice day and pray all together on Sunday for the Laudato Si week.
Yes.
Okay, take care. Thank you. Grazie. Grazie Aglaya. Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Ciao Nick, have a nice day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello. No.
So these all added as generic name.
Thank you very much.
Un saluto alle suore francescane qui che vedo, del Gesù Bambino, che sono sempre presenti, brave.
Dulce and Emerencia. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Patricia, bye bye.
Bye.
Ciao a tutti.
Someone is talking. Aglaya, ho visto che c'erano delle domande molto specifiche sullo storytelling.
No, erano tante e il tempo era poco.
Quindi se mi dovessero chiedere la tua mail, posso darla?
Certo, assolutamente.
Perché ho visto alcune persone che io conosco che sono interessate molto a questo tema e lo usano in modo diverso, ma lo usano. Quindi magari posso dare il tuo mail, va bene?
Dargli la mia mail o anche quella dell'associazione che di fatto...
Ok, però io credo di non averla. Magari quella dell'associazione me la mandi perché io ho la tua personale. Va bene?
Benissimo.
Perché ho visto che c'erano delle domande molto specifiche sullo storytelling, quindi va bene, grazie.
Bene, parte l'inglese.
No, è andato bene, ma tu parli velocissimo e non so Claudia, poverina, sei ancora viva. Claudia, stai bene?
Io
Tutto bene.
parlare
Grazie Claudia.
Saluto, ciao.
Ciao, vai a bere acqua, vai a enjoy una colazione, qualcosa, anzi una
Colazione no.
no, una merenda, scusa.
Ciao a tutti.
Ciao Maria Rosa.
Allora, a presto,
Ciao cara, grazie, poi ci sentiamo noi, Ok, grazie a tutte. Grazie Flo, buon pomeriggio.